So it's not the mold itself, it's the chemical it produces as it decomposes its food. Myco means fungus, toxin means poison. And since not all molds produce mycotoxins, which molds make them, which ones matter most, how the food was processed and handled, indicates whether or not they have had a chance to form.
Greetings, everyone. You are now watching the Health First Coffee Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan River, and I want to thank you for tuning in again today. For those of you who have been following the show, you remember our two-part series on mold. You can go back and watch those episodes if you didn't catch them already. But today's episode picks up right where those left off. Today, we're talking about mycotoxins. Not the mold itself, but the toxic compounds that the mold produces while it's growing and potentially leaves behind in your cup of coffee. Now, almost every food staple can contain mycotoxins. Grains, nuts, dried fruit, apples, and yes, coffee as well. And that's what we're going to talk about today. What these mycotoxins are, where they come from, and how they affect our health as humans. Now, this episode isn't intended to scare anyone because there is a lot of fear-mongering out there around this subject. However, there's also a lot of hand-waving away of this subject as well. And the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. So that's what we're going to explore today. Everything you need to know about mycotoxins in your coffee. With me, as always, is Chief Learning Officer over at Purity Coffee, Ildi Revi. How's it going, Ildi?
It's going great, Jordan.
Thank you for joining me on this hot episode today, all about mycotoxins. Why is it important for our audience, the coffee drinkers around the world, to understand this subject of mycotoxins in coffee, Ildi?
Well, the two big reasons, and they pull in opposite directions. The first is health. These compounds are real. The one that concerns coffee most targets the kidney, and for certain people, that's very important. Mm-hmm. The second reason is that this exact topic is a magnet for misinformation in both directions. There's a group of people who will scare you about mold in your coffee so it can sell you the cure. And then there's an opposite crowd, some of them inside the coffee industry, who'll just, as you said, wave the whole thing away and tell you it's nothing. And both of those are simplified, oversimplified, and inaccurate. And as always, the truth lies in the middle. But I want to say that I think both camps are fairly innocent because I don't think they're studying it. I think they're just repeating what other people have said.
Because there is so much need for research as well.
Right. So let's really get into what research exists and how people can be comfortable with the choices they make.
Yeah, and understand these things. The interesting thing about so much discussion of mycotoxins in the coffee industry is that they are not technically the worst offenders. There are other food industries that are much, much worse than coffee. But on the other hand, coffee is important too because people who drink coffee are oftentimes drinking it every day, all day. So there's a lot to be considered here. But let's start from the top, the very top, Ildi. What is a mycotoxin?
A mycotoxin is a poison made by certain molds when they grow on a crop. So it's not the mold itself, it's the chemical it produces as it decomposes its food. Myco means fungus, toxin means poison. And since not all molds produce mycotoxins, which molds make them, which ones matter most, how the food was processed and handled, indicates whether or not they have had a chance to form.
That makes sense.
Molds are fungi. Certain fungi, when they grow on a crop, produce toxic compounds as part of their metabolism. And those are the compounds that are the mycotoxins. So the World Health Organization and the Food and Agriculture Organization both describe them the same way. Toxic chemicals naturally produced by fungi that can end up in food. So just because something is natural, we know, does not mean it's safe.
Right.
Some of the most toxic substances we know of are perfectly natural.
Mhm.
What natural does tell you is that these are not additives. Nobody puts them in. They're traces left behind from a living organism when it grew in soil somewhere on a farm. Um,
Right.
and we just don't want it.
It's
So,
part of the agricultural process that we're not looking to include in our food production chain.
yeah, I mean, we're not eating. Everybody's not eating hydroponic foods grown in purified water.
Right.
Again, not every mold makes a mycotoxin, and even the molds that can make one don't always do it. So whether a toxin actually forms depends on the strain of the fungus,
Mhm.
um, depends on the health of the plant, how stressed the plant was, weather conditions like moisture and warmth. There are non-toxigenic strains of the same molds that would produce no fungus at all, but some strains of them do. And so with some organic practices, now this is interesting. Some farmers actually use some of the non-toxigenic mold strains that to outcompete the toxic mold strain. So
Right.
they'll introduce them, those will take over and they'll win. And so the bad ones can't get in there and produce mycotoxins. So it's really interesting.
A
So
microbial exclusion. So there are fungi out there, Bavaria bassiana, that we're spraying on plants, and we want the farmers spraying that because that means they don't have to use harmful chemical pesticides or harmful chemical fungicides. They're using a biological control instead. That's a good point, Ildi. There's a lot of good fungi out there. And that's really a human thing. Is this a good fungi or a bad fungi? They're all just living things trying to compete, right? So it is very interesting. But when it comes to the harmful mold, at what stage does that mold form and produce these mycotoxins?
yeah, so there's sort of two windows for where they come. Before the harvest out in the field, just after harvest, during drying, transport, and storage. And so that's the part that I think surprises people the most is that these toxins are chemically stable. And the FAO says plainly that they survive a lot of processing steps, milling, they survive baking, boiling, roasting, juicing for those that are on the fruit crop. So, as a rule, you can't cook or process your way out of them once they're formed.
Right.
And for coffee, ochratoxin A is the main one in coffee.
Mhm.
It's the main one that's been studied. There are all these emerging mycotoxins. But ochratoxin A has been shown to be reduced by roasting, but not in large quantities. And
Mhm.
also, remember that the higher the temperature you roast for longer, you're degrading some of the healthy compounds like chlorogenic acids.
Yeah.
And then you could be, if you're at too high a temperature for too long, you're creating polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which is
Which are
also
bad.
not good, PAHs. And so that's why how the crop is handled is more important than people think about it because it's better managed during production.
Yeah. You can't roast your way out of this problem. It might degrade the compounds or lower the total ochratoxin count, but you're saying you can't just roast your way out, especially because too much of a roast, you're getting different harmful substances like PAHs. It's a complex subject, Ildi. I see why you've dedicated a lifetime to it. Going back to these substances, you mentioned ochratoxin is big in coffee, but how many mycotoxins have we documented as humans? I would love to know the answer.
Yeah. They're finding new ones all the time. So several hundred have already been identified. And as a mycotoxin, they're all toxic because that's the entry requirement for the name. So, but I would say right now, currently, maybe 12, somewhere between 12 and 20 really drive the most human risk because they've been studied the most and were first identified in food long ago and have been seen at high enough levels to manage and to matter.
So a dozen or 2 dozen, dirty dozen, if you
Yeah,
will,
right.
of the ones that are the most important. They're the most ubiquitous. We've studied them. We know they're
Right.
not great for us. And what do those include?
So it starts with aflatoxins. Those
A is
are
for aflatoxin, right? I remember Sesame
A's
Street.
for And then for coffee, ochratoxin A, and
Mhm.
there's other forms of ochratoxin, patulin, fumonisin, zearalenone or zearalenone, and fusarium toxins like deoxynivalenol and the T2 group. So 3 families of fungi essentially produce all of them. They're
Mhm.
families, and there's lots of different.
Subtypes.
Exactly. So Aspergillus, Penicillium,
Yeah.
and Fusarium.
Fusarium.
Those are the big ones, yeah.
Wow. So, I mean,
Yeah.
there's this hidden war of mold that we don't even see if you're not familiar with the agricultural world and you're just consuming your food. It's so fascinating
Yeah,
that
but
there's
you've
this
gotta
battle going on.
yeah, but it's a battle, but it's also nature. I mean,
Yes.
imagine if we didn't have molds to break down all the plant material
Yeah,
that falls. Like, they're decomposers, we need them. We
exactly.
learned
It's so
this
true.
back in middle school.
It's a complex story is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's a very complex story, and so I wanna plant the flag on one thing, because we've gotta get the chemistry right. That's the whole point of why we're doing this. We don't wanna misinform. So for now, I would say that the Fusarium mycotoxin deoxynivalenol, which is commonly referred to as DON,
Mhm.
DON, and its colloquial name is vomitoxin. This is emerging as an important area of study for coffee, especially in the gastrointestinal system, which is where DON wreaks havoc from other crops. And I personally wonder, and some scientists, if you're listening, please start studying this in coffee, because I wonder if that's the thing in coffee that makes people feel sick in their guts. Some people, when they drink coffee, low quality coffee, they're like, "Oh, it hurt my stomach." And I
Yes.
wonder if this is deoxynivalenol, Don. That's from Fusarium, but that's not the main one in
Coffee.
coffee that has been known to be studied, and
Right.
that is
It's studied in
ochratoxin A.
agricultural feeds and grains and stuff. I'm really interested in the Dawn conversation, and we're actually going to have a specialist. Stay tuned, listener. Dr. Susan Gonya hopefully will be joining us to talk about Dawn on this show soon. So,
Yeah,
but let's talk about the mycotoxins that have been studied a lot in coffee. You mentioned ochratoxin A. Can we start there and just
yeah.
tell me about ochratoxin, what it is, what it does?
So, the World Health Organization lists it as just a common food contaminating mycotoxin. It shows up in a lot of foods, not just coffee. It shows up in cereal, dried vine fruit like raisins, um, wine and grape juice. It's also common in spices and in coffee
Mhm.
beans. It's produced by the Aspergillus and Penicillium molds. And here is something really important, very important fact for us. Ochratoxin A in coffee is formed mainly after harvest,
Hmm.
during just after it's been picked, during drying, and during storage. So it's not, unless there's rotting fruit on the plants, which, there can be sort of toward the end of a harvest. It's not really a roasting problem and it's not a brewing problem, but it's more upstream on the farm and in the warehouse side of things.
Oh,
So, yeah. So there's a detailed study from coffee growing provinces in the Philippines that track contamination at each stage. And so the molds responsible for during drying and storage were the Aspergillus species. And the practices that drove the contamination in these studies were exactly what you would guess: leaving the husk on too long, mixing in defective and damaged beans,
mm.
slow or poor drying that lets moisture in, or the storage conditions that were humid and hot. The mold is able to grow, and then the toxin gets involved. So, where coffee was dried quickly and the defective beans were
Left in.
graded out,
Yeah.
that made the biggest difference.
So those defective beans are a big part of this. It's not just about how they look or even how they taste. The defects contribute to your mold risk and your mycotoxin risk.
Yeah, it's where the risk concentrates, broken, moldy, insect damage, husk that's left on. That's why sorting is not just for looks. It's for food safety, but it's also where I must say that the specialty coffee industry gets its concept that if they grade it out, it's not a problem in coffee.
That's why they hand wave, because, hey, these aren't defective beans,
Exactly.
which are just a breeding ground for you'd imagine a pathogen wants a broken bean that it can get into easier than a whole solid bean with a hard exterior, right? So it makes sense. But just because something's not defective doesn't mean that it's immune to mold. That's a large leap.
Yeah, and the green grading is not a food safety practice generally.
Mm-hmm.
They did it for aesthetic and taste reasons.
Right.
Look, this is where the nuance comes in, because by grading those things out, we just said there's lower risk of it.
Yep.
But there is a tolerance also for broken beans in the green grading system. It's not just 0 broken beans and 0 chips and 0 cuts.
Sure.
There's like 5 equals 1 full defect, or slight insect damage equals 1 full defect, and they're allowed 5 full defects. So you can let them in. And this is why they're at low levels in technically correct specialty coffee. But I have to say, being in the coffee industry and having been a Q grader and a Q instructor, a lot of people in the industry, they just get the coffee from their importer and they put it in their sample roaster, they roast and they cup it. They skip the green grading stage.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is that the importers who send out specialty coffee, they have likely graded the coffee, or they've chosen a coffee. They have determined it. But again, there's a certain amount that can be in it. So 0 is not possible. But the honest answer is in between. So when you pool worldwide surveys, ochratoxin A is detectable in roughly half of coffee samples tested. In 2024, a worldwide systematic review found it in about 55% of samples.
So it's detectable is common, and that's where a lot of the fear mongering comes from. That's a scary statistic. Half of my coffee has this mycotoxin in it, but it's more complicated than that.
Exactly. Yeah. Detectable is not the same thing as harmful.
Right. So how much of that exceeded the safety limit?
Exactly. It's not the same thing. So in that same body of research, the average level in roasted coffee almost never crossed the European Union's maximum limit. And we know that EU has much higher standards than the US FDA when it comes to ochratoxin A.
Okay.
And across dozens of studies, it wasn't just this 2024 study, only a couple reported coffee above the limit on average. But the global pooled concentration does sit at a few micrograms per kilogram. It's present, it's measurable. But in coffee, it's generally well handled and low. So this is where the nuance comes in. And it comes in because not everybody is a healthy adult with a robust system. And
Immune
so this
system,
is where I really want to, always point out that there are a lot of people handling health concerns, and they really don't want anything extra to stress their system.
Yeah, that's right.
The FDA doesn't have ochratoxin A in coffee
at all.
At all.
No limits there, but they do in other industries, correct?
Correct.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
We could do a whole episode on that. I'm not going to sidetrack us, but let's stick to these levels because that's where we're at. Now, what happens to these levels during roasting? You said that they can survive, but how much?
Yeah. So ochratoxin A is sort of an exception to the rule. Aflatoxin, by comparison, heat doesn't bother it. Ochratoxin A is a little less stubborn, shall we say. So the research shows that roasting can degrade it by up to about 90%, but that's roasting it at high heats for long periods of time.
Sure, dark
And
roast.
with, a lot of these things have been done in a laboratory where they've infected the seeds with the ochratoxin and then they've roasted it. So it's hasn't been with, the low levels. So with this, anyway, the point is with this particular toxin, the roast does help with an asterisk. And the asterisk is that degrades does not mean it vanishes into nothing. Roasting transforms most of it, but it also, we've said, creates breakdown products. And sometimes those breakdown products, as you're over roasting or trying to roast out an ochratoxin, are also not healthy.
Harmful. Jeez.
Yeah. So researchers are honest. They don't fully understand it yet, but I can tell you that I have lab tested a lot of coffees. A lot of them do not have, most of them do not, the ones I've tested, don't test positive for ochratoxin. Those that do are still pretty low. And I have to say, there have been specialty coffees that have tested positive for ochratoxin, which means they pass the green grading, they pass the cupping test, and they look good. One of these coffees, it actually was a really beautiful coffee. I would have scored it like an 86 on the old grading scale. But it had, it had 2 micrograms of ochratoxin, which surprised me. Yeah.
So when it comes to roasting and these toxins, you're saying, ochratoxin does degrade largely during the roast, but it doesn't mean that it's just non-existent. And you can't expect your roaster to take care of this problem. You can't roast your way out of this problem as opposed to trying to fix it at the source. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. If you're counting on heat to destroy contamination, you've lost.
Right.
The right move is to keep it low in the first place at the production level and in storage, especially. So the roast is doing flavor work and health work and not damage control.
Yeah. So we covered ochratoxin. Now let's move on to aflatoxin. Tell me about aflatoxin.
So aflatoxin has been found in very poor quality coffee. Aflatoxins, 2 things. First, what they do. The FAO calls aflatoxins among the most potent natural carcinogens we know of.
Whoa.
The World Health Organization describes them as among the most poisonous mycotoxins. They are genotoxic, meaning they damage DNA, which is super important because it's not about your offspring, but your DNA is continually renewing your cells. So if they're damaging the DNA, your body's ability to generate new cells and reproduce itself, it's a problem.
Limited, yeah.
There's clear evidence they can cause liver cancer in humans, the aflatoxins. And in the literature that I've read, aflatoxin B1, first of all, it's classified as what's called a group 1 human carcinogen.
Jeez.
That's a huge concern. So the second thing is where aflatoxin molds are found. So they're produced by the Aspergillus molds, growing on not just coffee, but staple crops, especially corn and peanuts.
Oh, I love peanuts.
I know. And tree nuts like pistachios and almonds. Lots of grains, some oil seeds.
Yeah.
So these are foods that like billions of people eat every day. And they're often the foundation of the diet. I mean, corn, rice, peanuts,
So this is a big public health issue beyond just the coffee show. This is a massive food staple issue.
Yeah, it's one of the most important food safety issues for our world. And almost nobody in the grocery aisle thinks about it because, especially in wealthier countries, it's more regulated. Also, I do want to point out something about aflatoxin that's kind of interesting is that if you have hepatitis B and you're eating these aflatoxins, together they multiply a risk of liver cancer. So they actually
That's
are
wild.
synergistic for liver cancer. Yeah.
So
There's
a
other examples.
mycotoxin from a fungi and a virus, hepatitis is a virus, right?
Yeah.
Combine to increase cancer risk. That is a wild fact.
Yeah. 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 There are other viruses. We won't go there. There's another one. Fumonisin grow on maize, corn.
Yeah.
Those have been linked to esophageal cancer in humans, your
Jeez.
esophagus. So now we're not trying to scare anybody off their cornflakes,
Right.
but this is an important subject, and when we're talking about cornflakes, that's a breakfast food. So, you're drinking your coffee with your cornflakes, right?
That's right.
And the international limits for aflatoxins in nuts, grain, dried fruits fits somewhere between half a microgram and 15 micrograms per kilogram. So a microgram is 1/1,000,000th of a gram.
Right. Yeah. And one thing I had heard, you mentioned the cornflakes with the coffee. Another thing I had heard was milk.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're throwing your milk in your coffee and in your cornflakes, and now you've got talk to me about aflatoxin in milk.
Well, what do we know about the grains that are fed to dairy cows?
There you go.
There's different grades of corn, different reason corns are grown or maize is grown. And so that, for example, the European Food Safety Authority estimates about 1 to 2% of aflatoxin B1 in animal feed carries into the milk, and especially if the cows are high yielding. It's heat stable, so pasteurization doesn't help it.
Right.
If you're going to make cheese, then it's going to concentrate in the cheese. So where milk is monitored, it's usually compliant, but regulation here is strict and enforced. The US FDA action level is 0.5 parts per billion. And the EU limit is 10 times tighter at 0.05 micrograms per kilogram. Tighter still, especially for like infant products. So that's a big deal.
Wow, that's crazy. So it carries through the whole dairy chain.
Hang on a second. I want to talk to you about this because oat milk, people are drinking their oat milk. We know fusarium toxins are in grains like oats, T2, HT2, along with deoxynivalenol. So there's no limit set for that. Rice milk, aflatoxins has been detected in rice-based drinks. They also have some other issues, but especially for young children. And almond milk. Almonds are tree nuts. So aflatoxins, they're starting to look at that to see if they're getting into the almond milk. So they're kind of everywhere. So the main point is that cow's milk has enforced aflatoxin M1 limits in more than 80 countries. Plant-based drinks have no limits yet.
Wow.
They haven't been studied enough. And they have to do formal risk assessments. So,
jeez.
Yeah.
That is really fascinating, and it shows you the importance. It is kind of brutal, and it shows you the importance of regenerative agriculture and permaculture and encouraging this type of farming that's healthy for the planet, healthy for the end product, and healthy for the people who consume it.
Circular health, my darling.
That's right. And if you fix the problem at the source, you prevent this ripple effect. That was very enlightening, Ildi. The aflatoxin discussion is very fascinating. So listen, let's get down to the brass tacks about what this means for our health. We're not trying to scare everybody away here, but I do want to know what are we sure of from the research as far as what these mycotoxins do to human health?
At high exposure, ochratoxin A has shown their most established effect is kidney damage. That's pretty solid in animal studies.
Okay.
There's also research interest in the immune system and fetal development. So yet another reason for pregnant women to watch how much coffee they drink or avoid it, perhaps unhealthy coffees. But on cancer, major regulators are very careful. The World Health Organization says the kidney effects are demonstrated, while the Cancer Association in humans is still unclear. And with these unclear issues, again, we're looking at the people who have health concerns. Those are the ones we want to honor with clean practices. Because if things aren't clear, we want to err on the side of caution. So for us in the US, the FDA lands in the same place. It can damage the kidney in animals, and it may possibly cause cancer in people. But more research is needed on the effects in human. So this is not aflatoxin and liver cancer. It's a different toxin, different evidence. But here, this is where I really want you get anything out of this. With ochratoxin A, the half-life in the human body, there was a study, and it comes to about 35 days. So let's call it a month. So if you take in ochratoxin today, half of it is still in you a month from now.
Okay.
So that fact changes how you should think about the risk, right? Because it's not just one cup of coffee in the morning. A single exposure is fairly trivial.
Right.
But what matters is daily intake of low quality, higher toxin coffee several times a day over many years. Now
Sounds
you
familiar.
see what's happening.
Yeah.
So because the compound doesn't clear between this morning and tomorrow morning.
Right.
So really it comes down to the quality. A poor quality daily habit can have just this constant level in your system. So that is the real exposure that we want to take seriously, not just a one-off cup.
That really makes this conversation more clear because it is a nuanced one no matter how you slice it, between these things occurring due to mold growth or maybe not, depending on conditions. And then throughout all the roasting, it's mostly roasted out, still sticks around, but then you drink it and it's got a half-life in your, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. And I think you've done a really good job.
Yeah. And again, we want to, when people say, wave it away and say it's not really an issue, yeah, maybe for you it's not, but for some people it is, you
Right.
know? And so just speak for yourself.
Yeah, that's
you
true.
know, and I worry about the people undergoing cancer, people with treatments, you know, people with, you know, just immune systems that are compromised. They don't need more stress on them. So they do want to
Yeah.
drink something clean, and that they can say, okay, it has been proven that it doesn't have the levels that.
And so I think that's what's really important. Those are the people who really need to understand this
Mhm.
and heed this advice. It's people who are very health conscious
Mhm.
for whatever reason they choose. It's people who are immunocompromised and need to be health conscious. And it's for people who drink a lot of coffee. They drink it every day and they drink more than one cup and they never miss a day for years.
Right.
I think that is the key here. If you're one of those people, this is very important to you.
But also think about the flip side of it. Imagine if you're drinking the healthiest coffees you can over your lifetime with all the positive health benefits. So we take this unclean stuff out, but now we're drinking things that are known to have the good stuff, which is where we want this podcast to eventually start talking about. So we can stop talking about this. So Jordan, but here's the thing. Let's talk about how prevalent this is again. So there was a 2024 worldwide systematic review that pooled coffee studies going back to 1997. And they had over 3,200 samples. And ochratoxin A was detectable in about 55% of them, with positive rates ranging from like 7.5% in some studies to 100% in others, right? So, and then there's a different global review pooled its own set of studies, and it was 58%. So it's common in finished coffee. And here's a detail we know about this toxin. In green, unroasted beans, The prevalence runs lower, closer to 40%, because ochratoxin A is not made in the living plant. It builds up after the harvest.
Right.
So if the cherries get moldy or it's drying and in storage, warmth and moisture gets involved.
After harvest.
Right.
Interesting.
And fusarium and Don, again, are a different story. We'll deal with that in another episode. Let's just stick with ochratoxin A here. Common, though, again, is not the same as dangerous. And that's the whole point. When those same reviews estimated how much ochratoxin people actually take in from the coffee, and then compared it to the tolerable intake set by the FAO and WHO and the Europeans, every coffee type came in under the line. See?
Well, there you go. Yeah.
Right? So in the worldwide review, only 2 studies found roasted coffee above the European maximum limit at all. And the review stated this conclusion plainly. So the ochratoxin A content of coffee is not toxic to consumers worldwide, while still telling producers to keep, doing the good work to prevent and reduce it. Again, large margins of exposure, no history of coffee actually doing massive harm to people. But we can't say this about the other grains and the other
industries
and other
That's right.
mycotoxins.
So the key takeaways for you listeners at the end of this mycotoxin episode is it really comes down to the quality of the coffee, how it was grown and processed, and then testing of that coffee to know where we're at with these mycotoxin levels. If you don't have mold in the first place, then there are no mycotoxins to be deposited. There are low quality, cheap coffees that do have high levels of mycotoxins. So you do need to educate yourself, and you do need to go with a higher quality source, especially if you're health conscious, immunocompromised, or if you're drinking coffee every single day. But testing isn't how you fix bad coffee. It's how you ensure that the coffee was grown with good practices. And Ildi, the last thing I want to say is I think this is where a lot of people get in trouble is coffee is an agricultural product. And sometimes people look at it like it's something else, like a pharmaceutical product almost. And when you deal with an agricultural product, you're going to have to deal with some level of mold at some point.
Yeah, you're going to deal with soil and, microorganisms.
Compost. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, clean is what we're after.
Yeah.
And Jordan, the other takeaway is this. Clean is the baseline we should all, as humans, ask of our food producers and food manufacturers.
Yes.
All foods, coffee included. For us, we feel it's the bare minimum starting point for producing a health-first coffee. And all coffee drinkers around the world deserve a coffee that is this well-crafted with health in mind. And coffee has so many beautiful benefits, which I cannot wait to start talking about.
We'll get into it. Thank you so much, Ildi. This was an awesome exploration. I learned a lot in this episode. I know the listeners picked up a lot, and they're going to go forward in their coffee career with a whole new understanding of mycotoxins. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, dear listeners. Stay tuned. Make sure you're subscribed. Give us a like down below. And most importantly, share this episode with a coffee lover. We love when you share the Health First Coffee podcast. That's all for today, everybody. Thank you again for tuning in. This is Ildi, Revi, and Jordan River signing off. Wishing you an extraordinary day out there. We'll see you next time on the Health First Coffee podcast.